Tengo una pregunta para Gloria relacionado al tema que abordó en los breakout sessions. Y mi pregunta es, comentabas en esta situación, creo que es una publicación que van ahorita a presentar en el Congreso en Europa, pero habías comentado que para bajar la prevalencia del virus de PCV2 en lechones, lo recomendable, por supuesto, era irnos al manejo en hembras y en primerizas. Sin embargo, ¿qué experiencias tienes tú con respecto a la interferencia de anticuerpos, ¿sí?, maternos con respecto a la vacunación de hembras y vacunación de lechones, ¿no?, en un sistema de producción que en dado caso utilicen esta estrategia?
Pues es buena pregunta y de hecho era una duda que teníamos, ¿no?, o un miedo. Y para eso lo que hicimos fue hacer un estudio en el que medimos más de 5.000 lechones con niveles distintos de inmunidad maternal, desde niveles muy altos a medios y bajos, y ver realmente la vacuna, qué capacidad o hasta qué punto podía superar esa barrera de la inmunidad maternal, y eso fue así, ¿no? Y ese estudio de campo al final nos dio la tranquilidad para aplicarlo, y a día de hoy yo diría que no sé qué porcentaje exacto se vacunan de granjas de cerdas en España, pero quizás un 10, un 15% de las granjas de cerdas se vacunan contra circovirus y con Circoflex no hay ningún tipo de problema para superar esa barrera de la inmunidad maternal.
Buenas tardes. Mencionan que para la aplicación de la MLB con 4 veces al año es suficiente. Hay algunas granjas actualmente que creen que no es suficiente esa inmunidad cada 4 meses y están usando hasta 5 vacunaciones al año. No sé qué comentario me puedan dar. Están haciendo cada 10 semanas en lugar de cada 12.
It is, right, go ahead. It's about vaccination, sows more than 4 times.
Yep. I can start and offer my feedback, and I welcome others to join in. I don't anticipate you would see any consequence from doing it, so I don't think there would be a downside other than there's extra expense. Not big extra expense in the grand scheme of things, but some extra money over the course of the year for vaccine. But in a herd that's already immunized, we typically don't see any performance losses from the mass vaccination event, so from that perspective, it's fairly safe to do. I think, while we don't have maybe the perfect studies to say that this is the exact frequency to vaccinate sows, I don't know that I would expect to see a better performance by going from once every 13 weeks to once every 10 weeks. As a general rule of thumb, when pigs get a vaccine booster and they increase their titer, that higher titer lasts for about 13 weeks. It's a general rule of thumb, and every individual animal is going to have a different response. But for the most part, whether it's influenza or PRRS, other pathogens we vaccinate for, if you are catching your animals every 13 weeks, you are going to raise the titer up, and then you will booster them again before the titer gets back below a threshold where the animal is susceptible to have a problem. That would be my 2 cents. Renata?
¿Se justifica el cierre de granja en zonas de alta transmisión de PRRS, donde hay granjas muy cercanas? Y pues sabemos que están entrando y saliendo nuevos tipos, ¿no? O sea, bajo estas circunstancias, ¿vale la pena hacer un cerrado de granjas o mantener un programa de vacunación?
I would start by suggesting that both have value. Herd closure and a good vaccination program, I think they both have value and independent of each other. So I think you can consider both to be a part of an overall PRRS management solution. And I certainly appreciate that if you're in a very pig-dense area, it can be frustrating to close the herd, get to the elimination point or get to the goal that you want, and then you have another outbreak. I can totally understand that. But we have more and more evidence that more PRRS strains in the farm cause worse losses. Meaning that if you already have 2 or 3 PRRS strains in your farm and you have the new outbreak, you will have a worse outbreak than if you have no wild type strains in your farm when that outbreak happens, if that makes sense. PRRS outbreaks that are the 3rd strain, the 4th strain, the 5th strain on the farm, the consequences are greater than if that same virus comes in and causes the first outbreak. And a lot of that work has been done with the whole genome sequencing, where now we can appreciate that herds have multiple strains fairly often, and we can look at the total losses for the herds that have the multiple strains, and we see the total losses are worse in that situation. So while it may be frustrating to do the herd closure, go through that, and then have another outbreak, I would suggest that the outcomes from that will still be better when you have the new outbreak than if we don't have the herd closure, and now the new outbreak is our 2nd virus, our 3rd virus, our 4th virus, if that makes sense.
Buenas tardes. Bien interesantes todas las charlas, pero quisiera hacerle unas preguntas a Lance. Espero que… Primero quisiera ver si entendí. Me parece que el tema del costo-beneficio es clave, pues, ¿no? Para la toma de decisiones en cuanto a un problema de muchos años que no hemos podido controlar, ¿no? Y me gustó mucho el juego de números, nomás quiero saber si lo entendí. El beneficio que terminas mencionando es la diferencia entre un costo probable de los brotes y el costo real de vacunar. Es mi primer pregunta.
So the cost of vaccination in our example here, we tried to include everything that would go into vaccination. So like I said, you have all of the costs of the dose, the labor, all of those things that, as I said, would be accounting costs. But yes, we also try to include any potential losses from decreased performance caused by the vaccine. And so in a previous perspective, we kind of broke that down into more detail. So perhaps that's something that I can share with the BI team and then they can distribute out. But in this talk, as you said, looking at cost benefit, I think the big thing I wanted to address is how do we at least begin to calculate when there's a lot of uncertainty? Because there's no guarantee that we're going to have another break. And so how do we begin to at least account for that in our cost-benefit calculations?
Yeah, ok, sí. Me refería que los $8 o el número que resulte no es un beneficio tal cual, pues el productor no va a ganar $100,000 o $200,000, se va a ahorrar $100,000 o $200,000.
Yes, that is correct.
Ok, entonces veo como dos claves para el cálculo, la probabilidad de que ocurra el brote y la intensidad, digamos, del brote, ¿no? La probabilidad, por ejemplo, la calculas, puede ser de la herramienta de combat, por ejemplo.
Exactly, yes.
Y el daño, digamos, no sé si mostraste una tabla por ejemplo, del rastro, ¿no? Del valor de la canal, por así decirlo. En México no muchos rastros usan esa tabla. Entonces el daño vendría más, o el impacto vendría más de la mortalidad, la conversión alimenticia, etcétera.
Yes, that's correct. I do think where variation can have an impact, even if your slaughterhouse isn't using a table like that, if you are marketing your pigs in batches, then you might have a group of small pigs that are kind of the last to leave the barn. And so we would call that the closeout group. And so by having that increased variation in our growth rates, we have more pigs that we're waiting on before we can, get them to a target weight. So if we can reduce the variation, we end up speeding up the full turn of the barn. So even without a Packer matrix, we are very concerned about that lightweight group in the barn.
Pero el impacto más grande para ti, ¿cuál sería? ¿Ese? ¿O la mortalidad o la conversión? ¿Cuál es el dato que tomarías como más importante?
That is going to depend on whatever prices currently are. In times where feed is more expensive, then of course feed conversion is going to be the more important variable. But when pig prices are good, anything that would decrease total output, so mortality and average growth, would be very important. And so it's going to go back and forth depending on what kind of the prevailing prices are. So it's hard to say, in general. Probably the most important is total output. Like if you were to just do maybe over 10 years, what would be the average and what would be the most important? I think average daily gain and mortality together. But like I said, when feed prices are high, then that one feed conversion is more important.
Ok, gracias. La última. El cálculo fue basado en años, ¿no? Decir, la probabilidad de que en 10 años, en 5 años me dé un brote, ¿no? O varios brotes. ¿Cómo mantienes al productor interesado en ahorrar ese dinero? Después de un año o dos, va a querer retirar la vacuna, pues.
That's a very good point. And so I think part of that comes down to making sure that you have, good kind of standard operating procedures in place to ensure that, no, this is going to be the rule, because we've calculated it out over a longer period of time. But you could do that analysis over a shorter period of time, maybe update it every 2 years or 3 years, and say, okay, over the next 3 years, we're going to use the latest information from combat, seeing whether we have a higher or lower chance. So let's reevaluate and make a new decision. So that way it's not a, once every 10 years we're going to make this decision. I mostly, like I said, 10 years was a little bit of an arbitrary decision on my point, but I wanted to show that, there is still economic justification to say for over a very long period of time, if we vaccinate every group of pigs, we're still going to come out ahead. We'll save more money doing that than having the risk of more outbreaks. De nada.
Una pregunta, doctor Linares. Mencionó en la inoculación de virus vivo, existe la posibilidad de que haya una recombinación. Es
una posibilidad muy alta.
Muy alta. ¿Existen trabajos al respecto de este tipo de hecho? Sobre todo pensando que hay una granja donde ya tenga incluso la identificación de la gente involucrado como tal. Y algunas granjas tienen esta estrategia de inocular a los reemplazos, tenerlos en un área de GDU separados, esperar que se enfríen e introducirlos. En ese caso también existe esta posibilidad de, al tener un esquema de manejo de ese tipo, ¿existe una recombinación o tendría que haber forzosamente otro virus involucrado para que se dé esa recombinación?
Sí, buena pregunta. Como Mario dice, el virus se cambia muy rápido y muta y recombina y todo. Entonces, muy difícilmente tenemos un virus clonal, un solamente virus en las granjas. Muchas veces tenemos una combinación de virus diferentes en las granjas. Entonces, toda vez que hacemos una suero inoculación, estamos ofreciendo una oportunidad para para esse vírus replicar-se de maneira, nós estamos amplificando la replicação e oferecendo oportunidade para recombinação, mesmo nestes casos de uma granja aislada.
Es que es
Y también,
interesante.
como Clayton nos enseñó, cuando hacemos esto en hembras jóvenes de reemplazo, vamos a retrasar el crecimiento, aumentar mortalidad, disminuir el desempeño reproductivo, y esto hay consecuencias para toda la vida, ¿sí? de la hembra productiva del sitio 1.
Y justamente la pregunta es por esto, porque entonces pudiera ser una explicación cuando tienes tus medidas de bioseguridad muy férreas, muy controladas para evitar el acceso de un posible virus nuevo a la granja, y de repente, ¡pum!, cuando haces el monitoreo, te aparece que ya es diferente, y por más que buscas, y quizás ahí surgiría la alternativa y no entraría por el alimento y por dentro, porque todas las medidas de bioseguridad son muy fuertes. Entonces esa pudiera ser una posible respuesta a esos hallazgos que súbitamente aparece así un nuevo virus, por decirlo de una manera, en un sistema que lo tienes estrictamente con una bioseguridad muy férrea. ¿Pudiera ser esa la explicación?
Podría ser. Y para saber si sí o si no, por eso que la secuenciación completa nos permite comparar.
Y ahí linaje sí pudiera utilizar, poder hacer una interpretación en ese tipo de casos.
También. Pero si estamos investigando recombinación, el sistema de linajes no es suficiente. Así, en estos casos necesitamos de la secuenciación completa. Sí. Por eso que Clayton decía, siempre que hay un brote, vamos a hacer secuenciación completa, al menos recorrer las muestras y tener en el freezer, para en el futuro, cuando queremos comparamos las dos secuencias completas.
Okay.
Desde el inicio de brote y después cuando surge súbitamente de dónde vino, ahí la secuenciación completa nos permite entender si es recombinación, si es diferente, si es completamente diferente, si hay alguna mutación o si no.
Muchas gracias.
Eu tenho uma pergunta para a Glória.
Go ahead.
Sí, me gustó mucho su presentación y tú hablabas de monitoreo de PCV2 por PCR con puntas de língua o con otras cosas. ¿Qué esperamos nosotros, Gloria, de una granja que no tiene problema de circovirus tipo 2? O sea, sabemos que hay circulación, pero no hay problema clínico. ¿Qué esperamos de los resultados de PCR y ELISA?
A nivel de lenguas, lo que esperaríamos es no encontrarlo. Es decir, lo normal es que circovirus no esté circulando en edades tempranas, y cuando aparece es porque hay transmisión vertical. Entonces, ahí no tendría que estar, y ya tendría que ser un primer señal de alarma. No hace falta que encontremos en lenguas CTs de 10 a la 8 o 10 a la 9, como podemos encontrar en casos de circovirosis en cebo, ¿no? Solo que detectemos alguna vez alguna CT de 10 a la 2 o 10 a la 3 ya tiene que hacernos ver que algo está pasando y que hay transmisión vertical. Y que mientras PRRS esté controlado, pues muy probablemente tendremos una circulación subclínica de circo que no nos va a llamar la atención, pero en el momento en el que PRRS aparezca y haya un brote o cualquier otro patógeno que desestabilice la granja a nivel inmunitario, es cuando vamos a encontrar que circovirus aprovecha el momento para dar más clínica y subir las cargas víricas.
Gracias.
Then I have one more question for Clayton. It was a question that was previously asked. And for Lulu, is this question number 2 on the sheet? So, Clayton, sometimes we see that producers don't have an outbreak, so they assume that they don't have an outbreak on site 1, so that sow herd is clinically stable, but they want your consultancy because site 2 has clinical problems. What would be your advice in this situation? How would you kind of systemically analyze where the root cause of the problem is located?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the first thing, Marius, I would want to do is understand, is the site 2 problem coming from the site 1? And if we have our reference sequence, if we have our baseline sequence from the last strain or all the strains we've had at our site 1, that makes that pretty straightforward. We can get some samples from the site 2, we get the diagnostics back, we send them to Alberto, he tells us what our sequence is, and he gives us the comparison. He just tells us right away, and that's typically not a confusing comparison. It's either very close or it's different enough that it's obviously something different.
Right.
So the site 2 could certainly have its own challenge that's independent of the site 1. But we should be able to, with diagnostics, sort that out pretty quickly. If the site 2 problem is one of a lateral infection, so it's not related to the site 1, we probably need to consider depopulating it if it's continuous flow, at least have some bubble in there to try and push the PRRS virus out of the site 2, but the site 1 doesn't need to be a part of the solution in that. Maybe we vaccinate the pigs or something at the site 1, but the site 1's not the problem. Just as likely as that situation, though, is the site 1 can be the problem. Even without clinical signs at the site 1, it's very common to have big impacts at the site 2. And when I say big impacts at the site 2, 10% mortality, 20% mortality, that's very possible. I've seen plenty of site 2, site 3 mortalities at 20%, and the sow farm is 28 PSY. And it's a very confusing situation, but the maternal antibodies from the sow, they're very powerful. And they protect those piglets until they get into the site 2. Then when those maternal antibodies go away, those piglets, they can crash pretty hard. So if the site 1 is part of the problem, that's when we need to consider herd closure, mass vaccination, because we've got to stabilize the site 1 even more than it looks like it is today.
And what kind of samples would you suggest to take to really determine if site 1 is stable or not?
Yep. I would do processing fluids first and foremost. They're easy to collect and we can test a large number of pigs for a very low cost. If those look negative, then I would go to test my wean pigs. You could collect blood from wean pigs. That is an option. The family oral fluids is also an option that's fairly user-friendly. If you can test wean pigs from the site 1, immediately weaned, say in the 7 to 14 days post-weaning, that can be really valuable. If you're putting them into a site 2 that's all in, all out, and we know it's clean and empty when the pigs go in there, give them a week or 2 post-weaning, and then you can hang some ropes.
Right.
And that's probably the easiest way to test them.
And what if I vaccinate my piglets?
Yep.
Because we don't want to kind of contaminate the samples with the vaccine virus, or it's then difficult to distinguish?
Yeah, it's important to distinguish, but it's possible. And this is where the right diagnostic tests are very important. So doing just a regular PCR for PRRS, we should expect that to be positive. If we've vaccinated the pigs recently, we've got to expect that to be positive. We do have PCRs that are specific to strains of MLV. So if we've used Engelvac MLV, we can use a PCR that is specific to that sequence, and that will help us to know, is the vaccine strain there? If we really want to prove it's only vaccine strain, then we've got a sequence. We've got to go to the full step of sequencing. But all those diagnostics I talked about, Alberto has the capability of doing it at the HMC. So if it's not something that you can do at your lab today, make sure to catch Alberto before he leaves today.
Okay.
He'll be at the bar in about 10 minutes.
He only charges a tequila, right?
Yeah. 1 tequila per test.
2 tequila. 2 tests.
2 if you want negative results.
With that, are there further questions for our speakers?
Speaking of tequila.
Por ejemplo, en un brote de PRRS, ¿sí? Donde se mueren 200 hembras, abortan otras 200, en un hato de 2,000 vientres y cierran una granja, ¿qué va a pasar con los servicios semanales si la cierran, no? Para la empresa donde yo trabajo financieramente no es viable, ¿no?
You know, I would say that early on in the herd closure, you generally don't have a problem, especially if you have 200 abortions, or I think 10% of the sow inventory they have an abortion. Those sows will come back into heat, and the sows recover clinically pretty quickly. So for the first month, for the first 6 weeks, how do you get through PRRS? You breed through PRRS in that situation. So whatever your breeding target is, somewhat ignore it. Everything that is coming into heat during the outbreak, breed it. Breed it, breed it, breed it. Your conception rates will be low, but again, how do we overcome that? We breed through it. We breed as many animals as we can. Certainly, how long the herd is closed, that dictates how big of a problem we're going to have with hitting our breed target. Every herd is different. What is the parity profile of the herd when we start, right? If you get lucky and you have a low parity profile, you don't have to cull anything for parity, and you can keep those animals in the herd for longer. If you have a situation where you can bring some gilts in, you should. Bring as many gilts in. Early on in the outbreak, when everybody has PRRS, bring those gilts into the farm. They will get exposed, and they will recover with everybody else. But the missing breed target is the most common challenge, I think, that I hear from people about why the herd closure is difficult. The last thing I would offer as a consideration, if you can find a Site 3 that is in a biosecure area and you can breed gilts at the Site 3 in the biosecure area, you can minimize the number of misbreeds because you basically have 15 weeks now that you can breed in that Site 3 and leave those gilts there to gestate. You have 15 weeks of herd closure before you have to bring those gilts to the sow farm, to farrow, to the Site 1. You can breed and gestate a gilt anywhere, but you have to farrow her at the Site 1, obviously. But if you have that good situation with a Site 3 that's in a biosecure location and you can breed gilts at that location, you can make those gilts a part of the breeding inventory, if that makes sense. So that's a very nice asset to have if you happen to have that capability.
Sí, es que en nuestro caso, la verdad, no nos dejan bajar las montas, ¿no? Tenemos que seguir cargando porque un hueco de producción no lo permite, ¿no? Entonces, no cierran la granja, tenemos que cumplir con los servicios a como dé lugar, ¿no?
Yeah.
¿Qué tan bueno es, qué tan malo es? No sé.
I would say, you know, breeding is really just a goal to hit the farrow target. The number of farrowings is the more important number of those two things. And PRRS will always have a negative impact on our farrow target. When we have wild type PRRS in the farm, it's going to cause us problems. And so we have to make a strategic decision. Can we make more pigs with a lower breeding number, but more efficiency? You know, a better farrow rate, better pre-wean mortality because we've closed our herd and we're recovering? Or are we going to live with less efficiency, so live with the virus, so to say, and live with the challenges of it, but hit our breeding target? And I would say as you talk with the leaders of the company and they say, you know, missing the breed target is unacceptable, I would say, well, let's make PRRS unacceptable. Let's talk about the biosecurity, right? And what are the things we need to do to make our farm biosecure enough that we don't have PRRS? Because PRRS is the root cause of us being challenged with hitting the breed target or the farrow target. So I would try to convince the decision makers that we should focus just as much on biosecurity as we do on the breed target in this situation. Easier said than done, I know.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Y una pregunta rápida para Alejandro. Platicando yo afuera con personas, para hacer la aplicación del gel, se nos ocurrió por qué no lo hacemos en las mamas de la hembra a la hora de que están comiendo, ¿no?
Bueno, definitivamente esa podría ser una alternativa también, vigilando el momento en que estás estimulando que los lechones estén lactando. Sin embargo, pues en algunas ocasiones pudiera ser que el proceso de la aplicación del gel pudiera generar un poco de escurrimiento y poder eliminar o desperdiciar un poco de biológico, ¿no? Por eso, pues aunque es una alternativa que podemos utilizar, una superficie sólida pudiera ser, o un comedero pudiera ser también la mejor opción, ¿no? Entonces, en resumen, sí, es una alternativa que podemos utilizar, es poner el gel a la altura de las mamas, de las tetas de la hembra y poder utilizar esa vía.
Nada más hacer un comentario que creo que vale la pena. Atos entre más pequeños son, es más fácil el control de PRRS, incluso hasta eliminación. Esto el doctor Jeff Zimmerman nos dio muchos datos de si entre más pequeña es la granja es mucho más fácil poder hacer eso, pero aquí hay un punto que quizás damos por hecho. Al hablar de cierre de granja es importante mencionar uso de semen negativo de PRRS. Lo estamos dando, se da por hecho, pero no se ha mencionado. Tú puedes cerrar la granja y puedes estar teniendo problemas con semen positivo, de nada va a servir cerrar la granja. Eso digo, son detallitos, pero que sí hay que ponerle más énfasis porque son los terroristas biológicos de la granja. Son en realidad el que tiene el mayor impacto de circulación de virus de PRRS en una granja. Es nada más el comentario.
Gracias por el comentario, es muy, muy importante.
So with that comment, I would like to conclude today's event. And first of all, before we're going to leave the room, because at 7 o'clock we have set up a tropical evening for you at the hotel, I would also like to thank people who are involved in this event who are not always on stage. So it is in the back, people from the agency who supported us brilliantly. It's Sven, aka Stefan, and Anna, so thank you very much. It's my dear colleague, Paulina. It is the PRRS battle horses, Clayton, Daniel, and Lance, who have supported us throughout over these years. It's a kind of a small circus that we are doing together. It's Gloria, Alejandro, Norton, Roxana from the breakout session. So thank you very much for supporting us for today's event. And a big shout out, please, to the Mexican team who have been fantastic hosts for this perspective.
And you, the mastermind.
And we have also prepared some small gifts for you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Mary. Oh.
Tequila holder.
That's right.
A Norton. Thank you, Gloria. Muchas gracias, Alejandro.
There's a lot of tequila here, Clayton.
Not for long.
Right? Yes. I would also like to ask you to quickly use the poll again, the Slido poll, because we would like to get your feedback. So I've prepared 3 questions. You may have your cell phone Slido application still open. Sven, can we show the rating questions, please? And it's just for us to understand how you like the venue, the event, and the program, so can adapt to your needs. And in addition to the Slido questions, the Slido poll that you have on your cell phone, we are also there this evening, so please let us know if you have any comments. Very valuable for us if we understand what is mostly needed as topics, as content to adapt and modify these events. So as previously said, with that I would like to close today's perspective. This year's perspective was an event that I appreciate a lot, and I'm looking very much forward, hopefully seeing you in Mexico for the American Perspective next year. Thank you very much for your participation, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all at 7 o'clock at the restaurant. Thank you.